and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman Stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today. Hello, and welcome to Our People, where we give Holdemans and ex-Holdemans a chance to tell their stories. I'm Waylon. I'm here tonight with Sandra. Would you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Sandra Loewen. I'm from Manitoba, Canada, and I'm married to my husband Keith for, I think it's 30, he's better with remembering this than I am, but I think it's 34 years. We got two daughters and two grandson and a granddaughter, and yeah.
Well, I guess now I'd just be ready to hear what you have to say, the story you want to tell. How did you come to be where you are? What affected your life? What healing have you done? Just all the things.
All right. Well, my first introduction into the Holdeman church would have been when I was adopted as a baby into a Holdeman Mennonite church, or a Holdeman Mennonite family. And I was adopted, I think, at around 2 weeks old. So from that perspective, I was raised Holdeman my entire life, as was my husband. But that said, I don't have a Holdeman DNA. I was Irish and Viking, Irish and Icelandic. So that's a real yin and a yang to the Mennonite culture. But I was adopted into a loving home. My parents couldn't have kids of their own and had put their name in for adoption. And my dad was very, very nurturing. My mother was very intelligent, she was a very strong businesswoman. And so I was loved. I was very loved. So when I look at, I don't believe that there were any coincidences. It wasn't an accident. I was put where I was put. There were stages of my life where, of course, I was really angry about where I had landed up. But in retrospect, I understand providence. I like the word providence sometimes better than destiny, because it's a protective place that you live, where God and nature actually, there's a spiritual power directing your path, and you have divine guidance. And I think when we think about our lives on a bigger scale, I think we're all here for a reason. And the journey is sometimes just trying to figure out what that reason is and what our path looks like. So for me, that was it. I look back and I go, wow, I wouldn't be who I was today if I hadn't learned the things I had learned. And the Holdeman Church and I were never friends, the organization itself. And so when I speak in context of the Holdeman Church in our conversation here, I'm referencing a organization. I know it's called Our People, and they often don't separate between the people and the organization, but I believe that the Holdeman Church is an organization that's under the principality of control. I think we're actually dealing with principalities when we're working with that entity, that corporation. And that said, I know a lot of wonderful, wonderful people that I love very dearly who are in that and are great people. And so I think they're connected. I think they have a lot of good attributes. They probably are where they should be on their journey. That's not for me to judge. And so I'm not going against people when I'm speaking about the Holdeman Church. I am talking about an organization, if that makes sense. I just wanted to clear that up. I have never told my story before, so I might be all over the place. And the reason I've never told my story is because I think part of it was shame, but part of it also was the feeling that it wasn't safe to tell my story.
Yeah.
And I think this is also part of my healing, because I'm learning as I progress that it's not what happens to us, it's how we experience it that shapes who we are. And so everybody who has been raised in that church or left that church or is struggling in that church, you're experiencing what is happening to you in a different way than I have. And I respect that. And so that said, when I'm talking about some of the stuff, this is my experience, and I'm starting to be okay with that. I'm okay that my experience didn't look and feel like everyone else's, and that doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make it a lie. It doesn't make it, because a lot of people will tell you, well, that I don't believe that, or you that can't be, or you just imagine that. But anything that, as a child till age 7, anything that you believe to be true, you actually experience in your body.
Right.
And so, yes, you are experiencing it. So I think there are many people like myself who have been subject to a lot of the trauma that is perpetuated in early childhood through the Holdeman Church or any other religion actually as well. It's not just this, but religion tends to be. And the Holdeman Church, I heard someone else say on one of these podcasts, which really resonated with me, is that the Holdeman Church is the safest place for trauma to be. When you're experiencing trauma, everything around the way their society is set up, the way they are organized, makes it causes trauma, but when you are in trauma state,
Mm-hmm.
it keeps you there. So um and when we look at dysfunction in families, so I'm going to be saying things about my family. I love my family. I've always been loved. I always knew I was loved. But when I had children of my own, I realized that I love my kids, but I actually am like my trauma prevents me when I'm repeating the patterns that were repeated to me, it prevents me from being the parent that I want to be. And so I started to understand with a lot bigger vision that the environment I was raised in was from a trauma response. They were doing the best that they knew how.
Right.
And I don't hold them responsible. Um, it is what it is. Um, but I think initially when I was given up for adoption, there's a lot of trauma right around that to begin with. So in
Right.
vitro and and in Canada, when you're adopted, they never tell you where you came from. You have no information, you have no idea, and you'll never see these people again, right? So the
Right.
social workers would have told my parents that the children that they adopt are 100% a product of their environment. DNA doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, we've learned that that's not true over time. But initially,
Yep.
back in the early 70s, late 60s, that's the message they were giving. So some background to my biological parents. They were high school sweethearts. My dad got drafted by a major basketball or baseball team. in the US, had a university scholarship, and being from a small town in Manitoba, after graduation, did a summer job, took off for school. And my mom found out she was pregnant. And back then, you didn't have social media, you didn't have a way to communicate. Found out she was pregnant. Her parents sent her to Winnipeg to be taken care of by nuns, home for unwed mothers. And when she went into labor with me, they sent her to the hospital for her to have me. And she had told her parents, like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this baby. I guess I'm going to have to give it up for adoption. And so the parents had drove into the city when they heard I was born, and they told her, they said, we've decided we'll raise her as if she were our child. We'll just keep that a secret. We'll raise her as she's our child. And she said, no. She says, I actually want better for her. Her parents were alcoholics. And so
Wow.
they said, well, screw, yeah, F you. And they walked out of the room and they left her. And so the baby, which was me, was given up went into foster care. And here she's left in the hospital. And they call and they release her from the hospital, and she goes down, and they've called her a cab. And it happens to be the same cab driver that brought her. And he's like,
Wow.
hey, where's your baby? She said, well, I gave it up for adoption. He says, well, let me take you somewhere. And she goes, no, I have no place to go. Oh, he says, oh, of course you do. He says, you're an answer to her prayer. He loads up her bags and he says, my mom needs someone to stay with her during the nights. We've just happened to start to stay with her. So you know what? I'm going to take you over there. And if you're comfortable taking care of my mom, staying with her for the nights, so he took her over to his mom's, and she actually landed up living there till she got married 2 years later. So this
Wow.
woman took her in and mothered her. So, it's, when I heard that story after I met her, I was just like blown away, because so many people always say you weren't loved. That's why you were given up for adoption. You weren't loved. Well,
Right.
who loves their kid more than that, right?
Right.
That's, such a beautiful story. And then I met my dad, and he was like, hey, I got called to the office, and I said, hey, are you willing to give your child up for adoption? He's like, what child? What are you talking about? He had no idea about anything. So that's the background there. My dad used to always tell us kids that we were doubly loved.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be true, right? Like, it's a beautiful story. So I always knew I was loved. I never, ever felt unloved.
Right.
But I have always felt like I'm not good enough. That was a big part of the rejection. I was the first of 4 children they adopted. They've adopted 4 kids in 8 years. So when we go, I guess if I'm going to tell my part of the story, I'm going to be honest about when I was 3, I was always very spiritually attuned, highly, highly intuitive. I could see. And I remember playing airplane on the stairs, and Jesus showed up on my step and told me I was going to have a little brother. And I was so excited because I was an only child, right? And I'm like, I'm going to have a brother. So I ran up to the garden where my mom was, and I told her, I said, they're going to call and they're going to tell us that we have a little brother. We're going to go pick him up tomorrow. And my mom's like, no, you get a child, you put your name in for adoption. It'll take 7 years till you can adopt another child. And I'm like, no, Jesus told me. And she's like, oh, Sandra. She refused to go in because I was worried she's going to miss the call. And I remember standing in the bathtub and opening up the window so that she could hear the phone in the garden if it rang. And sure enough, phone rang. It was Child and Family Services, that they had a little boy to pick up. So that's kind of how I could see spiritually. The first, and like I said, there was 4 of us adopted, all of us different nationalities, all doubly loved kids. We're all given up at birth, right? So different nationalities, different, but we got there again. Providence. I feel like we were put together for a reason. Each one of them were amazing. And we still have quite tight bonds to this day.
Yeah.
But I would say when we look at what my childhood was like, I've got a highly, highly over-functioning nervous system, right? Always on high alert. I'm very active. I'm very busy. When a mother's in severe stress, when she's pregnant, sometimes the baby gets the SCC, what is it? No, RCCX gene, I believe it is. And it gives highly intelligent kids, but you're also, your nervous system and your immune system is highly activated. So I would have been that hot, dealing with allergies, on high alert. So you can imagine this bouncy hyper kid who wants to try everything, you know, if it exists, I got to try it. Having to sit still in church. Oh, it just about did me in, right? Like you just couldn't handle it. And a big part of my mom's goal with raising me was I was not going to be spoiled rotten like other adopted children. And she didn't have the emotional capacity to actually be nurturing and affectionate, and physical contact was at a minimum. And that probably didn't do anything for the way my body worked. I don't like labels, but I would be your typical ADHD kid.
Right.
Because I still had, you know, my biological father is an outfitter. He's a hunter. He's a gatherer. Like my DNA was still a lot more, lot less suppressed than the Mennonites. So I lived I like to try everything. And then you're sitting in church and you're sitting so still, but I could pick up the collective energy of God, right?
Right.
So I would sit in church and I would actually allow myself to go to what I would call as a higher dimension. I would see things from an eagle's view kind of thing. So I would sit in church and I would be going places, because remember I told you I saw Jesus, and I would see streams, and in my imagination, it was great. That's what I did in church, so I could sit still. Otherwise I'd crawl out of my own skin, and I got pinched pretty hard, and you got spanked if you didn't sit well. So there was a lot of that connection on a higher frequency. And when you do that, you start to see things from a bigger perspective. So very young, I was able to pick up on collective energy. Is that a good word to use?
Yeah.
On a vibe that's sitting there. And then the 70s purge came along, and the Holdeman Church went into, I don't know what they call it, a reset. And I watched that unfold. My dad was excommunicated from the church because he said he was a follower of Jesus Christ, not John Holdeman, and they didn't like that. And he didn't change. He was a really solid person. And I watched the excommunication. I listened to the conversations that were going on. And as a child, I was able to pick up a lot of things. So during that time, we went from public school to private school. I was around grade 4. And I couldn't understand, because I would sit in church and I could see dark entities speaking from a pulpit with red eyes. I could see and feel the intentions. I could feel the anxiety. I could feel, and ironically, a lot of what was happening in the 70s in the Holdeman Church happened in 2000. and 20 with the whole COVID thing. It's the same mentality. It's the same, you're not enough. You have to submit. You have to, it's kind of that control. And as a child, that was really, really, I didn't understand why they couldn't see it. I didn't understand why my parents would believe these people. Like, I didn't understand why they mattered. And I watched things happen that were, I saw the whole thing of church shift. And I saw everybody becoming survivalists. And the whole thing was being set up. The whole systems, the churches, the schools, everything was putting people in a trauma response and into a survival mindset. And I just remember it started to become where I would see an excuse. There aren't the right words in a lot of this stuff, or English language. I don't know how to associate some of them, but I would say I watched everybody choose to become an avatar.
Okay. Yeah.
So you became who they wanted you to become. And anybody who wasn't one of the minions got picked out. So anything you were innately talented at, or you were blessed with, or you was prideful and wrong, and you were shot down. And so you were not worthy. Nobody was worthy. We were all sinners. We were all scum of the earth. We were all not worthy. But if you were part of this organization, then you were you were so amazing. And these were the criteria you had to play. And I watched it come into play where I watched people break down. And then I watched parents being told their children had to have their will broken before they were age 2. Break their will, break their spirit. And I watched, not only does that break the child, right? Where you're nothing, you go into parents are now not the safe place for the child, but the parents also have lost their instinctive way to protect their children. So these bonds that should be happening with our parents, I would watch those bonds start to go from parents being a safe place to now parents not being a safe place, and you were isolated and you were put aside and you were shunned. And I watched how badly people got treated when they weren't, when somebody else told you that this person wasn't worthy of love, and how that looked. And it did something to me that I couldn't validate that as being Christian or having anything to do with God. And I watched how they isolated the adults, and everybody withdrew emotionally. I know when my dad was expelled, to watch him become somebody trusted, to becoming what they wanted him to be, was authoritarian. He had authority before, but now he had to become authoritarian. And children became subservient. Like you were to be seen and not heard, and it wasn't safe to be seen. And if you did anything good, or you were happy, because I was a happy kid. I like to laugh. I like to have a great time. I love joy. But you had to start to really, really curb that anywhere, because if it bubbled out of you, well, then you got attention. And as soon as you got attention, you were suppressed. And so different, like I was saying, I kind of had premonitions. And I remember this one full moon, and I'm looking out the window, and I heard in my spirit, by next full moon, your dad will be dead. And I'm like, what? He's healthy. There's nothing wrong with my dad. But I knew in my heart that it was true. He was not going to be okay. And I told God, I said, you know what? If you love me, you're not going to do that to me, because he's the only person I trust. And sure enough, my dad died very suddenly just before my 13th birthday. I'm getting emotional talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's the first time I've really talked about this. But part of the devastation was losing my dad. The other part of the devastation was that I now knew God didn't love me.
Right.
And he had passed away in the hospital. So my uncle, his sisters, my dad's sisters, husband and her came to pick us kids up to go see the body. And we're driving to town, and he turns around, he said to us kids, he said, I thought Walter sinned when he adopted you kids. It's conceived in sin. And I didn't even know what that meant, but it didn't sound good. But he said, if you're going to amount to nothing for the rest of your lives, you could at least help your mom during this time. So I was the oldest. I was turning 13. My youngest sister was 5. And I knew that there was a prejudice against adopted people, but it didn't bother me, because I always knew I was doubly loved, because my dad told me, and he doesn't lie, right? But with him dying, that protection from the church. So now we went from a family unit with a father and a mother to a mother and being raised by a church, by an organization, because they stepped in.
Right.
So that is when so many things started to go very, very wrong in my life. I don't remember one person asking me how I was, but it was like a mantra over and over. Everybody said, you got to help your mom. You got to help your mom. You got to be strong for your mom. You got to do this for your mom. And so I was a pretty independent kid. I've been helping on the fields, and I knew how to do things, because I always had to be involved. Remember what I was saying initially. And so I dug in. I was one of those kids who didn't rebel openly. I knew that I couldn't change anybody, but I knew I could change myself. And so all my feelings got suppressed. Everything got shoved down, and I just chose to be a happy kid and do whatever it took and be supportive and take care of. My mother was she's pretty devastated, and like I said, she wasn't maternal, so we still had younger siblings, and I'm the one who had to do the maternal piece that my dad had done. So I had a big responsibility, and I knew it, and I enjoyed it. I liked the challenge of getting things done, and I knew how to get things done. But it wasn't long before these men started coming around, and the sexual abuse started. And they would tell me, nobody's going to believe you if you say anything. So the very first episode was the day after my dad's funeral. It was on a Saturday. Sunday, we had Sunday school. And we were in this little church kitchen, and everybody was talking about the funeral as if I wasn't sitting there. Oh, they'll never go on a family vacation. Because we did. We lived a good lifestyle. We went on a lot of family vacations, and we had a lot of fun as a family. And they were like, oh, they're never going to go on family vacations again. And then they started looking at me and telling me all the things that we would never do. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I haven't thought about this. And they're like,
Right.
oh, you're going to have to sell your farm and move to town. And I'm just going to lose my home. And they're all sitting there and telling me this. And the Sunday school teacher is just right along with it. And I just remember the hysterical feeling inside of me. So I went to the bathroom. Everybody else went to church, up into the church. And I'm sobbing in the stall because I hadn't thought about all these other things I was losing. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
And all of a sudden there was a man pounding at the door and he said, Sandra, come out of here. So I came out and he grabbed my mouth and he started shoving me out of the bathroom. And there was an open door that was usually locked at the other end of the women's bathroom. And I could see that's where he was going to take me. But somebody walked in just in time and asked, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I was just fixing the toilet, which wasn't true at all. And I knew it wasn't safe for me to collect myself. I had to walk into that church and hold my head up. And it just went from there. So I told you how I had kind of gone to higher level in my imagination as I'm sitting in church just to survive. And after the sexual abuse started, I found I couldn't come back. If I did that, I couldn't come back. And number one, God didn't love me anymore. So why would I go there?
Right.
And number two, coming back to the reality that was my life was too hard. And I could feel that my mind would split. I knew that I didn't know what psychosis meant at the time, but I knew that that's what would happen to me. And I knew that I couldn't go there. And so one day a girl tried something on me when I went to their house. And I'm just like, that's weird. Like, why does she want to play married? And why? Oh, this is weird, And I kind of just left it be. And the next thing you know, at school, they've told me they have a meeting and they tell me I can't talk to any of the girls in school. And I didn't understand. Like, they said, well, you were in the bathroom and you were laughing. My cousin and I were taping a transistor radio to her so that she could listen to music during school, right? So we were giggling. And they were like, yes, this girl told on you and you are homosexual. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is.
Wow.
So now there was an instruction that none of the girls, they did this at a big public announcement in school, none of the girls could talk to me and I couldn't spend time with any of the girls. And I was confused, but I'm like, whatever. My cousin, who lived close by, got sent away to another congregation because they said her and her mom were having trouble and it wasn't good for her to be with me. But I could hang out with the guys. And so this went on for a whole semester. Almost a whole school year. I think this incident happened probably somewhere around January in grade 8, I believe. And it continued all through grade 9. I was not to speak to girls. I was not to talk to girls. I couldn't go to anybody's place after school. I was shunned completely. And again, like, I didn't get it.
Right.
I didn't get it. I didn't even know what homosexuality was or that there was such a thing as being sexually attracted to your same sex. I didn't get it.
Right.
But clearly the person who made a move on me did and blamed me because, again, anything that happened with us didn't go to parents. It went to the church and the church would deal with it. And in the church would come and talk to my mom. So that was kind of a weird stage of my life that I only put together, like probably 10 years ago, what that had actually meant, because God protects you. He protects you from knowing what that actually was. But anyway, but when we talk about the abuse, the sexual abuse was there, spiritual abuse was there, and that was done. I know the one time there was revival meetings, and I'm like, okay, God, I really do want to reconnect with you. I want to feel better. And so they had this, they did this altar call or whatever, and I never would stand, and I would never stand, and I would never stand. And this one time I decided to stand, and I did.
Mhm.
I was like, I'm going to give this up because I need God. I can't do this alone. And I need God to protect me because I don't have anybody else. And then the preachers showed up and they wanted to baptize me. And I'm like, no, I don't want to get baptized. And they were like, yes, you're going to get baptized. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to get baptized. I had an experience with God. I making a commitment to a church is nothing to, I don't want any part of that. I don't like your church. I don't. And then they said, well, you promised your dad before he died that you would become a Holdeman. And they had made up so many guilt stories and trips. And finally I just said, okay, so they said, you need to be obedient. And I'm like, really? When I get to the pearlies, you're going to be standing there and you're going to say, oh yeah, Jesus, she obeyed me, so she's coming in. I said, I don't think so. I don't think by the way you live, you're going to heaven. I don't want to put my eggs in your basket, buddy. Like, that's not working for me. So what they did then is immediately loaded me up, took me to my uncle's place, called my uncle, and again, I had a cousin who lived there. I really enjoyed her. I couldn't stay in her room. They had to take the baby out because I couldn't be trusted around girls, remember? Again, I didn't catch it. And I had to sleep on a mattress in this nursery. And in the middle of the night, I said, that's it. I ran away because I had to go into his office and the abuse was happening in there. And I just said, I can't do this. So I ran away, and it was the summer. It was the summer between grade 8 and grade 9. And the mosquitoes were out and I was getting bit. And finally I made my way. This was an hour from home. I made my way over to my grandpa's in the morning. And I just said, God must have really, really hated you, or you must have done something really bad to hit me and your family. They were everybody in the extended family were good Christian people. And here was me, and I'm not complying. And my grandma just said, well, and maybe God actually was punishing, was maybe you came as a blessing and maybe we needed you. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. But then I told them what was happening, what my uncles were doing. And then they took me back home to my mom. And being my nervous system was like I was, home was the only safe place. So, and then multiple times, if I didn't do what they said, if I hung out with my friends, so then I started to hang out with Keith more. He was our neighbor, and he's my husband now. And if I hung out with him, then all of a sudden they would come and they would load me up and they would take me away again, remove me from my home and put me in a different position, in a different home. And I had to go work there because I was a problem child. Well, because I wasn't baptized, I couldn't be around youth in Rosenort. But if I went to my uncle's congregation, then I could be exposed to youth. But it didn't really matter because I always felt alone. Because I realized too, the more I compromised to fit in, I realized nobody's fitting in. right?
Yep.
Everybody's
Yep.
playing their avatar to fit in, but nobody actually knows who anybody is. It's all charades. So over time, I slowly got myself out of there and made my friends. And again, in our community, it was mostly boys that I, Keith's friends, and I became friends with, and they had girlfriends, and I didn't know how to react with girls very well. And yeah, the damage that does on a person, when you're always told you're not good enough. And I'd ask them, why don't you allow me to be around people? I would ask the preacher's wife, like, why can't I be around girls? I don't understand. And they said, well, you're way too influential and you're a leader. And so nobody wants their daughters around you. And I'm like, oh, but I still had fun. Like during this whole time, it sounds like I was miserable, but I wasn't. I had a great time. Like, but I had decided a long time ago, they weren't going to define who I don't know where I come from. I don't know who I am, but neither do you.
Right.
And you're not going to tell me who I am. That was the one thing that kind of pulled me through everything that I went through. So when we look at the impact of that spiritual, mental, physical, emotional abuse, I'm not the only one. Holdemans, you can't show your emotions. I saw no one could be vulnerable because of being vulnerable was a threat to the to the establishment, because when you're vulnerable, you grow. So they want everybody to stagnate. So emotionally, everybody is very, very shut down, isolated. And as you get older, I realize more and more everybody's alone in the crowd. There are very few Holdemans that actually have real friendships. And I have a lot of real connections with some really amazing people in there, but nobody in their group would know who they are because they've had to shadow anything that they're gifted at, they're talented at, their heart, you know, because you're not worthy, you're not good, you're not loved for who you are, you're loved for your behavior. So, and this kind of stress starts to break the body down over time. And I think that's what we see in those circles. I think when children respond, it triggers the parents' trauma. And I see that generational trauma just being perpetuated. And then you have teachers, you have, these fifth generation teachers and preachers, and they're so emotionally immature and so comfortable in their trauma that they're so triggered by anything that is unsettling that you see so many people shutting down, having autoimmune diseases, having depression, having because of the primary emotional repression that's there. You're looking at a very simulated life, I would say. So yeah, that's in the end, I mean, I've come through it all. I've done a lot of healing, but I just wanted to share some of the stuff because if you're going through it, there's nothing wrong with you. And because you're not experiencing that reality the way other people are, doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make what you're experiencing a lie. It doesn't make you strange or weird, or it just makes you human. And that's beautiful. And we weren't created to just survive life to get to heaven one day.
Right.
We're created to bring heaven on earth. That's why God sent us here. And some of us, our giftings are different. The things that God's given us to shine in or that we're gifted in, when that can't be blessed or nurtured or expanded in an environment, it doesn't make that environment wrong or us wrong. We're just, it's teaching us to grow. And like a butterfly cut out of a cocoon can't fly. So the struggle that it's going to take to get you to where you need to be is actually a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what you guys are, what I'm hearing you do with your podcast is supporting everybody who's growing through that, struggling through it, where they are in this journey. None of us are ever getting there.
Yeah.
We're all learning all the time. And is probably one of the greatest gifts you could ever give someone.
Wow.
This being removed from your nurture, from your familiar surroundings. Every time they did that, it made me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times that felt like it broke me.
Yeah.
But what if we aren't broken? What if you're not broken? What if you're just fine? You're just in the wrong space at the wrong time and you don't know what you need to know yet to shine. Like, I think so many times we believe people when they tell us that we're broken or there's something wrong with us, whether it's doctors, whether it's preachers, whether it's family, and they tell
Right.
you, you're broken. There's something wrong with you. What if it's not? What if we're not? What if you look at them when you're going through labor, something's very broken. Every time you're in the middle of creating something, it's a mess.
Right.
So I just want to encourage people, you're messy, that's okay. You're
Yeah.
still lovable and you're much more interesting,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And you're being authentic. You're not an avatar. Isn't that exciting? When you can actually live your reality and not be in a simulation and be in an avatar. I'm not saying everybody in there is, but I'm saying a lot of us had to survive that.
Yeah. Would you want to talk a little bit about your work?
Oh yeah. Over time, I've got as I was healing, I would get downloads on different modalities. And then I would see how the body was starting to work. And then I would go take a course that pertained to what I had just learned or connected. And so one of the things that I'm learning too is that it's the same thing. It's like I said, it's not just the Holdeman Church, it's organizations, right? So we need allopathic medication, we need naturopathic. But again, everything has its place. We do need surgeries. We need emergency rooms. We do need allopathic doctors. We do need some naturopathic stuff. But I found out that if your body is balanced and aligned, it will heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can do reset your body through your nervous system just using your hands. And God's really created us. We are enough. We have enough to survive. But everywhere we're marketed and we're controlled, you need to look like this. You need to take this medication. Your body won't do this. Your body won't do that. But when we go back to a 2,000-year-old remedy, Dr. Peter Goldman came out with a modality, and it's actually a 2,000-year-old modality that he's training people for again. And it's just balancing and aligning your body. And it's how your body works systemically and just resetting it. So I do that with people, and I pull in the different modalities because everybody broke down uniquely, they heal uniquely, and we just walk alongside. We work with frequencies, we work with, so we have work with vials to reset allergies, we work with bioresonance, biofeedback, different things like that as well, to just help your body reset with as little stress as possible.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of that is emotional release as well. All our emotions are created in organs, and when we can't release those emotions, we have dis-ease. Our body is not at ease, right? So our cells are created without the information they need. And it's beautiful when we reset the electromagnetic energy field and your body through your nervous system, suddenly your brain has access to your body's information and your cells start to be created whole again. And it is really exciting. It's really exciting. We're always learning new things all the time. And so that is kind of what I used to be an interior designer for many years. I worked with interior design. I taught interior design. And now I'm doing this. So you never know where your journey leads you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
In your work, is there ever, I don't know, any type of just therapy? I know it's all therapy in a sense, but actual talk therapy, talking through things, anything like that?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Because people come in and it's usually emotional, spiritual, all of that it affects the physical. So when you're physically not working well, your body also doesn't know what to do with the rest of it. So you never know what came first because we're quantum. We always work in the quantum field. So we're all, part social, part emotional, part mental, physical, and spiritual. That we're a package, and you can't be one without the other. They all work together.
Yeah.
And religion, religious abuse is not just Holdeman, it's huge. It's so devastating, the effects of it. I can't emphasize how widespread that is everywhere. It's not just, so we see a lot of that. We see a lot of it. And when you are aligned and balanced, you reconnect back to the I am, which is the God force, the life force within you. And connecting back to that helps you start to hear from God, helps you align yourself so that you can start to see your trauma. You start to see situations through a different belief system. You change your belief systems. And it's not somebody programming, it's you. It's you hearing it on the inside. You're made for more than that. You are worthy. You are valued. You are all of those things. And that starts the transformation. People have just radically quick healing processes. Sometimes it's crazy. And sometimes that's all that's that's needed is to know that I need to change my belief. Going from victim to taking control and saying, oh no, Another thing that I see really big with spiritual abuse is there's word forgiveness.
Right.
Everybody goes, I think I've forgiven. No, forgiven is a choice every time you think about something you forgive. When I tell my story right now, I'm forgiving everybody I thought about, right? But I think the thing that we miss is the grief. So many of us are grieving what we should have had. We're grieving what we didn't have. And then when we see our children and our grandchildren, we're able to provide for them what we weren't given, the support or the whatever. We grieve for what we didn't get.
Yeah.
And yet people say, oh, you should forgive. You should forgive. Yeah, you should forgive, but it's okay to grieve. And if we keep just condemning ourselves when people tell us, oh, you're not forgiving. Well, if somebody didn't ask for forgiveness, I'm not going to allow them back into a place where they can hurt me. Forgiveness doesn't mean come back and walk on me.
Right.
And that's what that society wants. They want everything to look okay. So, and I haven't arrived there either. Where my mother went through a transition and she's now in a different position where I'm exposed. Before I could go visit her in her home, everything was fine. I could live out. I don't need to see any of this other stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
As they get older and they get put into places where there's a lot more Holdeman people around there, I have to look at things again. And I see people who have hurt me, who are old, who are sitting there who have no consequences.
Yeah.
And my nervous system, I can't go visit her unless I'm regulated.
Right.
Right? It takes a lot of courage to go and to be in the right frame of mind and to be able to be healthy where it won't throw me for a loop for a couple of days. I'm still there. I haven't discovered it all, but I'm learning, oh, you know what? Today is not a good day to go.
Right.
Or I'm there and I'm learning how to make myself feel safe to get out of there. We're always on a journey, but that doesn't mean I haven't forgiven. That means my body remembers and it still knows that it's not safe.
Right.
So is there grief with it? Absolutely. So, and then a lot of addictions, a lot of us, I think the whole Holdeman lifestyle is almost an addiction, a workaholic social addiction. You have to do this to keep busy so you don't have, you're filling a space so you don't have to feel. And it puts you in a place where you're comfortable, where you can zone out. So repetition and all of that. And everybody's experience with how they process and regulate is different. But addictions we often focus on, is it the alcohol? Is it the cigarettes? Is it the porn? Is it the whatever? We focus on what it is that we don't want. And that when we focus at what is this giving us that I'm not getting somewhere else? And then we find out how to get that, whatever it is that we're getting there in a positive way. That's also an important part of regulating our nervous system, because a lot of this stuff has to do with our nervous system.
Right.
Yeah, that's something I've wondered about quite a bit, actually, is it seems like a lot of ex-Holdemans struggle with some addiction. They're either, they may be, there's a lot of alcoholics. There's a lot who have really unhealthy relationships and a lot of sex and that kind of thing. And yeah, that's really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, and that is part of regulating our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's so much guilt that comes with it, and there's so much condemnation. So that's one thing that with the modalities that we're doing has been really enriching for people, because when they start to understand our addictions are actually just needs that aren't being met,
Mm-hmm.
then it shifts everything. You know, we need to remove so much of the guilt and the shame and the fear and the, like, people are afraid to try something. Oh, that's a wrong modality. Oh, that, you know, the witches will get you, or that's evil, or that's evil and you'll never get out of it. So don't
Right.
try anything. But, you know, even with it's interesting. We've been a part of some people who have left the Holdeman's church and walked through with some people. And the one, my husband just looked at him, he said, do not pick up a Bible for 2 years. Do not even try. He says, everything you read will be slanted. He said, when you look at an index from -10 to 0 to +10, you're at a -10. Everything you read is you're evil, you're bad, you're cursed, you're wrong. And he says, and then at 0, once you have it programmed, you deprogrammed for a while and you start at 0, he says, then start to read the Bible, but use the Bible to reprogram, use the Bible to show you where you've been misled. Because if you believe the Bible, right? Because there's so much powerful thought processes that get taught to us, or beliefs, through subliminal messaging in that church.
Right.
That's not biblical at all. So if you keep being afraid of, you know, I'm going to go to hell, I'm going to be going to hell anyway, so I may as well do XYZ. I'm going to hell anyway. Maybe it's time to start using the Bible to debrief those myths.
Mm-hmm.
Because God's word isn't at all like that. So I'm not a religious person, but I do believe the Bible. It's alive to me. It's amazing. There's so much in the Bible that's crazy. It talks about, you know, the whole angelic realm and the demonic realm. And there's just so much fascinating information in there and so many stories. But every time Jesus speaks, he speaks about love. He speaks about life. He speaks words of encouragement. He speaks about support. They talk about, you know, different types of ministry in God's body. Well, you don't see that. If you're anything but, you know, you donate money or you're a preacher, your staff, you're really not of any value in a Holdeman church. Your talents and your abilities are not, people don't go up and, oh, you know, we're so glad you're here because you're such an encourager and I love how you host. And there is an encouragement done there.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's just so much guilt and shame and condemnation and whatever put on there that it's so heavy. It's so heavy. And that's where those addictions come. It comes out of a hopelessness. I can't win anyway. I'm not worthy anyway. And it numbs the feelings because you have all of these huge, big emotions that have been stuffed down. When we got spanked, if we cried, they kept spanking. If you quit crying, it was over.
Yeah.
Right? You have to repress. And so where do those emotions go? They don't move through us. They stay stuck in us. So that's where a lot of the addictive behaviors come in. And I haven't succeeded in overcoming everything either.
Yeah.
I'm 40 pounds overweight. I have been for 32 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel safe in a body that looks a certain way.
Yeah.
To this day, I don't want to look like a slob, right? I want to look decent, but I don't want to give a come on message to a guy, and I don't want women to be threatened by me. I want people to see me.
Right.
And the only way I feel safe being me is 40 pounds overweight. And my body has kept me at the same weight for 32 years because I don't feel safe to look different.
Mm-hmm.
Someday I hope I'll want to shift that, but by then I'll be old and in a nursing home, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's strange how our bodies work.
Yeah. You mentioned shame, and that's something I've been thinking about recently, talking with a few people about. I think for a lot of us, especially if we haven't been out as long, it's really hard to even see how deeply that shame has incorporated itself in our psyche and everything.
What's really helpful is when you look at emotions, to look up what is the emotional definition of that word. Because we use the emotions wrong a lot of times. And so when you Google it, go, what is the emotional meaning of shame? Because shame is a feeling that we should feel and that it should pass through us. But if it's not
Mm-hmm.
allowed to pass through us, it's stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes an emotion, right? Now you've got big emotions. Now disease or spirits, negative entities, low energy attaches itself and becomes part of your entity.
Mm-hmm.
So now you believe you are shameful. So that low energy vibration is sitting inside of you, causing you to not allow yourself to be seen or become vulnerable or to grow because it's stuck.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. I don't think I've actually ever looked up shame in the actual definition. It's a self-conscious emotion that arises when someone is concerned about how others perceive and judge them. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and when I look at my programs that I would look at shame, it would tell me, I just looked it up. It says shame tells us we are not worthy of God's grace. And so we believe we are not able to approach God as our Father. So we don't feel safe to reach out. So I think that's where a lot of us, there's been a lot of times in my life where I didn't know if I believed in God. Even when I seen him as a kid, you know what I mean? Like you're so disconnected and you don't know. You want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because if God is anything like these people say, I want nothing to do with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so shame is that disconnect.
Wow.
When in reality, you were created for such a divine purpose to bring frequency of heaven on earth. That's actually, we say the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How's it going to happen if we don't do it? Right? So why is this always supposed to be such a struggle and a sacrifice and oh. No, when you're doing what you're meant to be doing, it's joyful.
Mm-hmm.
It is an adventure and your life just becomes alive, and people who are meant for you to connect with gravitate towards you, and you connect and you spark and you build relationships and you build networks of people who are safe who are on the same frequency as you. And what you do is you gel and you grow and you expand and you, and it won't necessarily look anything. My experience and what I'm here to do is not the same as yours. That's why you're created, because you're going to be able to do it better than me, right? So for me to go, oh, thank you, Waylon, for what you're doing, because what you're doing is making such a huge difference in so many people's lives. And to you, it's just doing whatever it is that you're doing right now. It's interesting, right? But when you finish a podcast, how do you feel?
I
Fulfilled?
normally feel very humbled, and I have a lot of emotion. I feel humbled. I feel gratitude that I get to listen to the stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you guys are doing is such an important tool, but it doesn't feel heavy.
Right.
And so there's I'm all about language, and I really struggle with the King James version of the Bible, because it's like, it's by monarchy, written to a king, how his subjects are supposed to view God, right? But you take a verse like, come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. But you look at another translation, it says, come. Are you tired? Are you tired of religion? Come. Come watch me. Learn of my ways. Come watch the unforced rhythms of grace. I'm not going to put anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. That's how Jesus spoke.
Right.
He didn't speak English. You translate it from the Greek, and it's beautiful, and it's light, and it's fun, and it's like, wow, that's exciting. And so I think that's the part that when you push through, there's so much healing that happens in that journey when you are doing what you were created to do.
Yeah.
That's, you can't wait till you're healed and perfect to do anything, but doing what you love doing, what you were created to do, you just know it. You can feel it in your DNA. Your whole being vibrates on a higher frequency. You just feel different. Your body feels different.
Yeah. Something you said reminds me, it's something I've said before on another podcast, but I've been in therapy for several years, and I felt like I was somewhat topping out with all that my therapist could offer me. And we started this podcast, and it felt like I was diving right back in. It was just the next step of working on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the exciting part, is because the creator that created you is in you. Like, God made us in his image. So to always be putting ourselves down and not allowing ourselves, but even me sharing my story, the reason I haven't is I'm like, well, people are going to be upset and they'll think I'm telling stories about them, and how will it make my family feel? Because I love my family.
Right.
But at the end of the day, this is my experience and my journey, and I love them all. And I'm grateful to every single one of them for who they are. But this is my experience, and it's the way that it is. And I'm no longer going to be shamed about the way that I saw it and the way God's using it.
Right.
So, yes, I'm sensitive. Yes, I have ADHD. Yes, I can be dramatic. I'm Irish. I've got lots of zip. And yes, I've said things that aren't good. And yes, I've stood up to things. And, there was another stage in our lives where we stood up, where there was, we helped my husband, and two other guys exposed a guy who'd been breaking into people's homes and stealing their underwear, but the Holdemans weren't doing anything about it. And, And the reason I'm telling this story is not to scare people about coming forward. I am just, again, it is part of our story. But what happened is that caused a big rift, not only in the Holdeman church, but in our Mennonite community. Because this man had prestigious appointments in the church and in the community, where he had access to a lot of people. And the evidence was found. It was presented to the police. There was a guilty, pled guilty. But our car didn't work. All of a sudden, one day, the brakes weren't working. Took it to the mechanic shop. And the mechanics in the community where we sent it, was not in our home community, called the police. And they said, somebody's tampered with their brake lines. They cut their brake lines. And so one day we get called into the police station. They said, what's going on at your place? And it turns out that they said, you know, if this and this Holdeman preacher says, get in the car, do not get in the car with him. They told my husband. And they told us our children weren't safe. And we had to sign a piece of paper saying we probably may not ever find out what they found in their investigations, but that we were going to have undercover surveillance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People were in our homes at night. Our doors were locked. Our dogs were disappearing. Or all of a sudden our dogs would be in our house when everything was locked. The messages that, you know, we could see you, and just constantly threatened. Our safeties was threatened because we spoke up. And we do it again. You know what I mean? But it's like, you do not speak out. You do. How many families came to us quietly behind the scenes and said, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Right.
But could not publicly stand with us.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the Holdeman church, it was the other Mennonite church. And we were not safe in the community we were in. We had to move.
Yeah.
In order to be safe. And, you know, when you hear it, when I say it, it sounds crazy. It sounds like a bad movie, but it really was true. And that's you, when you brush up against that idol, that principality, I think there's enough people leaving now, and I think they're messy enough within their own organization. I think they're falling apart a little bit themselves, that I think you're safer to do that. But that's where we need to be reaching out to each other, and we need to. And then somebody said to us, oh, well, you deserved it. You ratted somebody out. Well, what's going on when a whole community thinks it's okay for someone to sneak into your house and steal your wife's underwear, leave a DNA sample in it?
Right.
After he wears it when he talks to you, if that's okay, if that's that, when that's a problem that you expose that. How many people? My daughter was, I think, around 12 when this happened, and the counselor, we went for counseling. The counselor said, you know, how will it feel if all of a sudden he doesn't go to jail? This guy, like, are you going to be okay? And she said, you know what? Doesn't matter if he goes to jail or not. Look at the whole community supporting him. So all of them are doing the same thing or think that's normal. So nobody's safe.
Yeah.
A 12-year-old can see that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of systems that, and then you're supposed to be quiet and pretend nothing is. Well, I'm not going to pretend nothing is when children are getting hurt. I'm not going to sit back and be quiet when this keeps going on, because this childhood trauma stuff is not okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just because something good came out of it for me in the end, it's because I chose to make it. There are people who do not have the strength to dig down and do it. And there are people who can't do it alone, but they need somebody else to walk with them. And there are so many people. The way healing works is really interesting, because when I started to heal from the one incident, the one I told you about after
Mhm.
Sunday school, that guy trying to grab me, and he followed me around. He never got at me, but he was always lurking in the shadows and trying. It was like a bad dream, that dude. When I worked on healing that, all of a sudden, my daughter was getting other victims that I know were his. They were his his extended family were coming in for healing, and they were sneaking in. So these girls who have been sexually molested and abused have to sneak around to get help because the church won't allow them to get help. All they are now
Mhm.
is damaged goods, and you can only marry certain kind of men,
Mhm.
right? They put the girl who was abused into a basket where our son can't marry her. She's good enough for these people. She's damaged goods now, right? So they can't come forward. But it was impressive to me that when I heal from an abuse, something happened and shifted in everybody else that he abused. It was like it was taking power away from him.
Wow.
And we see that generally when you start to heal, whether it's generational, whether it's other people who are under that same um, pain, suffering that same energy. When you heal and shift that energy, something shifts in them as well.
Mhm.
So if you've been called to break patterns and to break cycles, generational cycles of healing, it is a thankless piece of work in this lifetime, right?
Yeah.
But future generations, you're going to see huge difference. So
Yeah.
it's the most thankless, so let's remember that when we see each other and support each other and say, you know what, you are making a difference.
Yeah.
And what you're healing is not only healing you, it is actually helping others to be able to come forward too.
Mhm.
Because that collective healing is a thing. I know that it is. I've experienced it. I've seen it. I see it all the time.
Mm.
That's why when I heard your podcast, something in me was just like so excited about it because that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
With everyone who tells their story and where they are on their healing journey is shifting pain and in more than just themselves.
Yeah.
Ripples.
Yeah.
And it's often the people that internalize everything and look like they're doing so good. They're good kids, they're obedient kids.
Yeah.
They cause the least amount of problems, but they are the ones who are often called to do that. We're it's often them that are shifting things.
Yeah.
And then when all of a sudden they're off the rails, well, we didn't see that coming. They were always the good ones. Right?
Yeah. That's interesting. Just my family, I know some of the people that knew us growing up said that our parents must be doing something right because their kids were so good. And I've heard someone quote this. Anyway, there's one child left in the church out of 5. The rest of us are working on, yeah. And we were one of those families that very, very repressed emotions and all of that. And then, yeah, I think we all wanted to make changes and wanted life for our children to be different than we'd had it.
Yeah, and that gap between the reality of what you're living and the experiences you're having get further and further apart till you finally you can't do it anymore. You have to choose one.
Yeah.
What do you see in your kids that that brings you lots of joy, but at the same time makes you grieve that you didn't have it.
I like to see them proud of themselves.
That confidence.
Yep.
And just be able to celebrate with them, eh? Isn't that so
Right.
exciting?
And to hear them say, I'm good at this. That's,
Mhm.
that's something I never got to do. I couldn't say, hey, I'm good at this. Even now I can't hardly say it.
I know, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think I don't feel like my mom would sit back and isn't proud of me.
Right.
I think she knows what I'm good at. And I feel like but you can't verbalize it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've never felt unloved and it sounds weird, but I even feel supported without them saying the words.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just not something that she can verbalize, because it was never done to her either.
Right.
That's where the beliefs start to change, when we see our kids and we start to believe, because a lot of times we're saying things, but we know they're true, but they're in our head, but they can't quite slide to the heart. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then it almost feels like when we can grieve that, it slides to the heart. Now we know that it's true. We believe it.
Yeah.
But you've gone by faith. You kind of, you know that it's true. It makes sense. You feel it, but you still can't believe it for yourself. It's like you just can't quite grasp it, or at least that's how it's been for me.
Yeah.
There's that disconnect. Yeah. And it's so interesting because you never imagine where you'll land up, right? You couldn't have seen it coming.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah.
And I think I've spent a lot of time really angry at the system I grew up in, focusing on the injustice, wanting revenge. Don't get me wrong, I've spent my time there. I've
Yeah.
felt it all for years and didn't know how to release it, because I wanted to see something change, and nothing
Mm-hmm.
ever did. And I wanted validation.
Yeah. That's
Right?
hard to get.
We're not going to get that, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
just, but again, it's because we're not dealing with a person. Like when you look at their church, they don't even have a leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the principality of they, the pronoun they,
Yeah.
they, them. And when I hear about these pronouns, I just giggle. And it's like, I know they, them.
Yeah.
I've experienced that.
Yeah.
Because we're not dealing with a person.
Right. Yep.
And it's that it's sure its persona is, I am God, I am the one true, oh, I'm the only one, the pride and the arrogance, and I just remember watching as that 70s purge came on, how everybody would go and they'd put on their Pharisee outfits, so they'd start their chanting their Holdemanese, like chanting an
Mm-hmm.
incantation. They have a different tone of voice. Their eyes change. To this day, when you go into a church, who you see in a church often is not who you meet every day of the week.
Right.
It's like there's something that takes over when they tie that head covering down, when they walk onto that churchyard. It's like something comes over them. You're not dealing with these people anymore.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know
Yeah.
how to explain it other than that. The frozen chosen, I used to think in my head.
Oh wow. Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
it's, and these are people I love. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not, we're not dealing with people. We're dealing with some sort of something that's
Hmm.
very low energy, very, very low energy. And to come away from that curse, and then the curses that they give. I never joined church, but they were praying for my husband, and they prayed that everything would go wrong for us until we would get, we would see that to come back or go to the one true church, right? So they
Right.
were praying curses on us corporately. When you get expelled and they hand you over to the devil, I don't know if they still do that, but I know my brother explained when he got expelled, they handed him over to the devil.
Yeah.
And there was actually a demonic entity on his shoulder for days. That's cursing. That's witchcraft. There's nothing godly about that. Like, that's not even a gray area.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's so to be able to renounce that, call it out, renounce it, say, I'm not, no, I break any ties with any of that. I don't agree with that. You can't, I think that's actually a very real thing that we have to do in order to get away from that too.
Hmm.
Because it's super unhealthy. Because
Yeah.
that is very, there's nothing in the Bible that's going to support that. I don't know anybody else that will treat their own people. We're non-resistant. We're kind. They'll be kind to everyone except their own family member that isn't doing what they told them to do.
Yeah.
How is that? How is that anywhere in Jesus's teachings? It doesn't exist. It's just, and so in the back of the mind of many of my friends who have left the Holdeman Church, they still believe that that's the only way because they've never gone back and actually done their research. They've never
Yeah.
searched the scriptures for the truth. And so they're still haunted by those old curses and those old lies and those old thought patterns and beliefs years after, even when they know that it's not true, that's still controlling them and hanging on to them. And
Yeah.
so I think that's something that we don't need to pussyfoot around.
Hmm.
It's kind of hard to say, but
Yeah.
if I'm wrong, I'm open. Show me the difference. Show me where
Yeah.
And so when you're coming in, what does it do to your body when you're cursed? When you have a death sentence over you and it doesn't matter what you're going to do, you have to go back to your abuse in order to be valuable or to mean anything or to be worthy of anything.
Yeah.
I think we're back at shame, aren't we?
Yeah. Wow.
When you've got that low frequency in your belief system, how do you be healthy?
Right.
How does your container hold joy? How do you have peace?
Yeah. Yeah. Something you said earlier reminded me of when I was in the church and the way I felt about things. Actually, the way I didn't feel about things. I had very few emotions. I could, yeah. Even my children, I love my children more than anything else. And even with them, I couldn't I couldn't feel very deeply.
Mhm.
And I have been amazed at since I've left at the depth of emotion I've been able to feel since getting out and opening my mind to everything.
To see a trauma response. They would say a trauma response is I would die for my kids, but I don't know how to be present for them emotionally. I don't know how. I can't hold them.
Mhm.
When they're crying, I can't hold them. I have to walk away.
Mhm.
That's a trauma response because it would open up feeling in you. So that didn't mean, and I think that's where our parents were.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, they did the best that they knew how, but they were in full trauma response. And then here we are with our needs not being met and thinking there's something wrong with us, that we're not
Mhm.
worthy of love. But all of the way that they set things up makes it very easy for the church. Because
Yeah.
when your kids disassociate with you, when you're no longer emotionally attached to your children, they're going to find it through their peers. And if they all
Yeah.
get baptized, now they're a part of that church. So all that early childhood trauma makes you perfect, Holdeman.
Yeah.
It's the perfect setup. And then they have their society set up. That's why I think, that's why I call it a principality. And these women, this trauma, a woman is the emotional balance for a family.
Mhm.
That is our instinctive gift. And so when you're dealing with the father and all the children, that's why these women are on antidepressants, because they've got to be, look what they're all holding. And they have to do that while they're wearing their heels and cinching their waists and looking a certain way and creating a Sunday dinner and reading Sunday school quarterlies and washing their clothes up and hanging them out to dry and having the most
Right.
beautiful yard and
Yeah.
it's not even humanly possible, hardly.
Yeah.
So you have to be on an antidepressant until your body goes into an autoimmune response, and then you become when you physically can't carry on, your body becomes diseased, and then you have a reason that you can't continue to go. So you don't have to go to the church. You don't have to, you know what I mean? Keep
Yep.
beyond that. But that wheel, and it's so hard for those women. Like, it breaks my heart sometimes.
Yeah.
But, and then walking away from that, when that's your distraction, all the social entertainment, all the, and then to sit by yourself and actually start to feel, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yep.
But I see more and more people are starting to do that, and they're creating communities where it's safe to do that. But a
Mhm.
lot of people just jump into another church right away
Yep.
and do the same thing. But the people who actually stop and think and feel before they leap into the next spiritual or a next religious experience, I think will do better.
Yeah.
At least I see that from them.
Yeah.
Balance is hard.
Yeah. Well, I think that went really well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was fascinated. I really enjoyed that. Anything you want to add? Anything important yet? Or are you ready to be done?
Well, I just want to say to everybody out there that you're not alone, and don't be afraid to reach out to somebody if you're needing something. There is no one magic modality. There is no one magic pill that's going to fix everything and make it all good. Our bodies need different things at different times, different modalities, different support people, and just start to open your hands and see who you run into. Things are not a coincidence. Someone is looking out for you. So when you run into somebody or you hear something or something feels like highlighted in your, you see something somewhere and it feels highlighted, investigate it, see what it may hold something for you. And If your journey looks completely different than anyone else's, that's okay. It's still okay to tell your story. And the way you experienced it does matter. It really does, because there's secrets in that to how your body retains information and kind of what you're good at. And sometimes we don't even know when we've been repressed for so long. We don't even know what are we innately good at. We think, well, everybody else has got all these good things going for them, but I got nothing. Well, I got news for you. I haven't seen anybody who doesn't have something. And you've got something too that the world needs. And just dig deep and learn to trust yourself, because you deserve it. You matter, and you are cared for.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate the opportunity.
sure.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.